Inside Outside Innovation is the podcast that brings you the best and the brightest in the world of startups and innovation. I'm your host, Brian Ardinger, founder of InsideOutside.io, a provider of research, events, and consulting services that help innovators and entrepreneurs build better products, launch new ideas, and compete in a world of change and disruption. Each week, we'll give you a front row seat to the latest thinking, tools, tactics, and trends in collaborative innovation. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. I'm your host, Brian Ardinger, and I have Nicole Rufuku with Bonsai Hiring. Welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thanks, Brian. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. You and I had a chance to spend some time together at the Inside Outside Innovation Summit back in May, and your particular talk was really well received for a couple different reasons. But to get our audience up to speed, let me tell a little bit of background about who you are, and then you can add to that. You have written and are in the process of finalizing your book called Hiring for the Innovation Economy, 3 Steps to Improve Performance and Diversity, and came out to the summit to talk about that, this whole concept of how do you hire for innovation in a world that's changing in that? So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about kind of how you got into this space of innovation and hiring? And I know you have a product background in that, and we'll go from there.
You know, my path has been largely accidental. I always admire people who are really strategic about the steps they take in their career. I haven't had that experience. So I started out my career in strategy and finance, and I started it at Microsoft, fell in love with product because I was kind of an embedded strategy person on the Windows product team. And from there, I just kind of started building my expertise. I did some research and customer insights at a digital ad agency here in New York. And so, after that, I did a couple startups that were kind of successful, not as successful as I wanted them to be. But from that, I started thinking a lot about how to build products the smart way. Looking back at my startup experience, I was frustrated by the approach that people took, the approach that I took. And so I started reading up a lot and kind of experimenting with different ideas. So I launched with a group of friends a startup called Light Matter. It was a consultancy called Light Matter, where we actually helped people get their products out into the marketplace as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible. And that's kind of where I started thinking about how to do innovation. I went on to an innovation studio called Neo after that, where they kind of had better answers to this question. And so I was able to learn a ton by working with large companies, small companies, startups, and really thinking about, how do we innovate in a way that optimizes for learning and focused on testing and customer driven. And so Neo, that was an incredible experience. And Neo, as you know, was acquired. And after that, I went on to look for an in-house position. So I was really, determined to find something where I could focus on a product long term. And I was talking to a lot of startups that were kind of after Series A, ready to scale. So I'm in New York, and I talked to lots of influential entrepreneurs and, successful startups and, these brands that have a lot of cachet in the market. So I was really pumped to get those interviews and those opportunities. But I was really disappointed by the interview process that I had at each and every company. And so that's when I started thinking, wow, this is a consistent problem. And it actually gave me a lot of hesitation to join any of those startups, because what I assumed was, if I'm having a terrible experience with your interview process, there must be a lot of crap behind the scenes, inside the culture, inside the business processes that I'm not seeing externally in the press, right? So because of that, I said no to those opportunities, but also because of that, I said yes to the possibility of kind of exploring this problem space. So I dove into a ton of research and just read up on, as much data as I could find on how to interview properly. Because the biggest question to me was, is there a right way to do this? I keep seeing people doing it the wrong way. I remember myself doing it the wrong way. Is there a right way to do it? And so I read, a ton of research, both academic research, research from the field, lots of big consultancies, Deloitte, I think McKinsey and PwC have some research in this area. And so I came out of all of that thinking there is a right way to do this. And can I create a solution to help companies do it better? And that's kind of how I arrived at Bonsai.
I love the fact that you kind of took your product development experience and customer discovery and everything you've learned from that and kind of apply that to a new take and new area of your life here. In that process, as you're helping other companies and that build out products and interview customers and that, what were some of the key things that you used to apply to this new area of research and topic that you wanted to dive into?
So that's a good question. Yeah, you're right. I applied my product background, and it's interesting when I think about any problem now, I apply my product background. So I don't even know if I would have known how to approach this problem any other way. So when I work with companies today, I try to do two things. I try to give them a set of tools that they can easily and very quickly apply to their hiring process. But more broadly and more importantly, I try to, help them understand and embrace a set of principles that are innovation principles that need to be injected into their hiring process in order to update it, modernize it, but also make it relevant for the new economy. Those principles, and you'll recognize this from any innovation conversation you've ever had, but the three principles I try to stress is collaboration, continuous improvement, and focusing on the user. Collaboration is really just me telling teams or trying to demonstrate the fact that hiring is essentially a team sport. Most people, even if they, hire with a team of interviewers, each doing their own rounds, etc., they don't really act as a team. They don't define their goals together. They don't collect data together. They don't think. And so collaboration is really important for updating this process and modernizing this process. And that happens from the very beginning when, you first open up a role and you're trying to define what you're looking for, all the way through the hiring decision. So what I stress is it's really important to create shared understanding for the team across the entire process at every single step. And that's something that's kind of baked into the tools that I provide for them. The second thing is continuous improvement. So I created this 4-point scale. I don't care if you use the 4-point scale. What's most important is that you make the hiring process measurable in some way, right? So can you find places to collect data where you want to learn, where you want to improve? That's the second thing. The third point I try to stress is focusing on the user. The interesting thing is that, we often look at job applicants as adversaries or as people who are less qualified just because they don't have, or less smart than us because they just don't have the job yet, right?
Right.
And the shift that I try to advocate for is that companies should think about job applicants as their most important customers. They're more important than your actual users. They're more important than your paying clients. They're more important than your shareholders. They're more important than any other stakeholder because they're the ones who are going to decide whether or not your business succeeds or fails. Why not think about their experience as the most important user experience you have to manage? And then once you do that, how can you improve that user experience so that everybody who touches your process, whether they're just submitting a resume, going through the process and maybe not even getting hired, becomes a brand advocate? Because in the end, even if they aren't right for your team, they are in your space. And in this innovation economy, you probably are going to encounter them later on, whether you partner with them, whether you sell to them. So we really want to pay attention to our hiring brand and start looking at job applicants as customers and not the reverse.
I really like the way you tackle this. All your points, it seems like a lot of companies throw hiring over the fence, like part of a
Right.
HR job. And so
Yes.
this idea of collaboration and bringing the entire team together, both for understanding what you're hiring for and why, and making them part of the process is so key. Secondly, like you said, measuring and understanding what you're trying to get out of the hiring process and the people that you're trying to bring on. And then that idea of not only hiring right, but driving that brand and being a customer advocate for people that touch your brand, whether you hire them or not, is so critical, I think. And it's probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, or tell me what you're seeing in the marketplace, but it seems like the companies that really do well are able to take some of these principles and apply that as they scale so fast in the marketplace. And that's where, or they fall down because it's so hard
Right.
to hire fast at scale.
We see these companies that start out really strong with these vibrant and rich cultures.
Mhm.
And then as they begin to scale, that kind of falls apart. And the reason why they're falling apart is not because there aren't internal processes, it's because they're not hiring well. They're not creating process around it. They're not gathering data. They're not being smart about it. And it's really hard for small companies that are scaling is that when they first start out, they take so much care in the hiring process. Everybody interviews the job applicant.
Right.
And what starts to happen is that as hiring becomes something that the CEO gives to somebody else, then hiring becomes HR's job. And that's never really the truth. HR is there to support the hiring team, but the hiring team owns the hiring process. Why? Because they are going to have to deal with the results.
Right. It seems like there is like almost a magic number, at the early stages. You do have this ability to kind of hire folks that are one degree of separation or friends of the team, or you have,
Right.
it's easier to find that first group of 10, 20 or whatever. But as soon as you get into that 20 plus kind of range, then you're sometimes having to go to other methods that are 1 or 2 degrees removed. And so you have to have that kind of process
Yeah.
to bring it back, bring in the culture to make that happen. So tell me a little bit about the book that's coming out here soon, I believe. So it's called
Yeah.
Hiring for Innovation Economy. Talk to the audience a little bit about what the book entails and what they could get out of it.
The book is super short. It's part of Sense and Respond Press. And the goal with all of the books under that group is that these books are designed for really busy professionals and they're designed to be very actionable. And so this book is going to be, I think, about 100 pages, really easy, quick read. And the idea is that you are going to walk away with 3 tools that are going to help you transform your hiring process. And they're very straightforward. I primarily spend the majority of the book outlining those tools. And, I give you a little bit of background about why these tools are important, why they work, some of the research. I spend some time kind of educating readers about bias and about some of the data that's been collected around bias in the hiring process. But overall, it's really focused on 3 tools. One is called star mapping, and it helps teams better articulate what they're looking for in a job candidate. They do this exercise before they actually create a job description. And the magic behind star mapping is collaboration. Instead of a hiring manager, and I've done this before as a hiring manager, instead of a hiring manager getting a job opening and quickly jotting down or slapping together a job description, a lot of times we do that by reading competitors' job descriptions
Right.
too and copying from those, or just saying, hey, HR, can you write up a draft and I'll approve it? So instead of that kind of haphazard approach, this is a process where you bring a diverse cross-functional team together that knows the role that you're going to be hiring for, that's going to be interacting with the person that you hire for that role. And you work together to figure out the 9 attributes that you're looking for in that hire. And together you kind of work through, you brainstorm, and then you prioritize together the 9 most important roles, and you deprioritize the 9 most important attributes, and you deprioritize the rest. And so those 9 attributes then you can use to create the job description. You can use to help guide the recruiter in the recruiting process so they know exactly where to look, where to search, and how to search. And then you can also share it with the rest of the company. And the great thing about the approach is that it kind of forces teams to find balance with the 9 attributes. So 3 of those are hard skills, 3 are soft skills, and then 3 are focused on kind of adding dimension to the team, adding perspective to the team. So that's usually where teams will add some diversity dimensions, but really it's about thinking about what your team is missing today and what a new person could add to it that would give you an advantage in the market, would help you better understand your customers or create a better product.
Well, I like that approach. A couple different reasons.
Hmm.
You briefly kind of touched on the diversity aspect, but I think a lot of people, obviously, it's a hot topic, and how do you get a more diverse workforce? But I don't think a lot of people think about the reasons why, or
Yeah,
tangibly pull out, like you mentioned, the kind of the benefits or the holes that you're trying to cover or fix in your overall strategy by looking at a
right.
diverse set of folks coming into that.
Especially, I have a lot of experience with this from a product perspective. So,
Mhm.
especially for small teams that are scaling a product, they're looking at expanding their base of users. Usually, that means that you need to think more creatively about the needs of those users. And, many times that means you want to bring somebody on your team that can think about a global perspective, maybe speaks another language, or has experience in another vertical that you're trying to work with or grow into, maybe even, regional, or maybe created a service for men that you also want to target towards women or market to women. And obviously then you might need a woman on your team. So I challenge teams to really think about what is going to give them an advantage in the market and what are they missing now? What perspective would add magic to their performance? And honestly, that dimension category that we're talking about now, that's where the stars are made. Lots of people have the same hard skills, and people, as they mature professionally, will learn those soft skills, but you can't learn perspective.
Right.
And, we can build empathy, but, in the end, teams with a competitive edge see the market differently.
So, in addition to setting up the process, doing a lot of the hard work ahead of time, kind of understanding who you're trying to hire for and the roles and the skill sets and that, what else is about the hiring process is broken, or what other things have you seen that can kind of fix some of the problems that you've seen in the hiring
Yeah.
process?
Two other things that are super important, and these two things have a ton of research and decades of data behind them. One is structuring the interview process and interview questions. And what that means is that teams ahead of time define the questions they're going to ask job candidates, and then they ask every job candidate the same set of questions in the same order. And so that has been shown to cut bias in the hiring process by half. So that's super important. And the way that I approach it in Bonsai is that I actually have a process for teams to design questions together. Again, they're in a room together. They have the 9 attributes, and then they think about the questions that are going to help them measure those attributes. That's one big area. And then the next thing is the way that you evaluate candidates needs to be a lot more like data driven. And so after every question, the interviewer should actually score the job candidate using some kind of scale.
Mhm.
And the key to the scale is that ahead of time, the team has defined what each point on the scale means. So it's not just saying, oh, this person did pretty well on this question. I'm going to give them a 4 out of 5. But before that interview even happens, you and the rest of the hiring team have defined what 4 means and what
Right.
you expect to hear at 4. And so that's actually called an anchored scale. So the
Mhm.
anchor is the definition of each point of that scale. So if you structure your interview questions and then you also score candidates after every question using an anchored scale, that has been shown to bring bias in the interview process near zero. So that's really, really powerful. A lot of teams won't be able to implement that for various reasons. Some teams will score the interviewer right after the interview.
Right.
And that's okay too. It's just not as effective. But I just always encourage teams to start somewhere, start implementing some kind of scale. I advocate for a 4-point scale so that people can't stay neutral. And I provide like a template of how they could define a scale without having to redefine it over and over. But yes, those 3 tools, star mapping to define the 9 attributes you're looking for, how to design structured interview questions with your team, and then also how to apply a 4-point scale to your hiring decision. Those are the 3 areas where I spend a lot of time in the book. And they're flexible and they're fairly straightforward so that hopefully after a hiring manager reads the book, they can take even like a lightweight version from all 3 steps and implement it right away. They don't have to go in as deep as I'd like everybody to. There's a simple way to do every step of the process.
Well, I love that because it's tangible and it's tactical. I think a lot of people, the whole HR realm and hiring and talent, it seems to be a magic art. It's like, well, how do I get the best
Right.
person? And putting some structure around it and giving some advice in that, I think it's going to be very helpful for folks who want to pick it up. So if people want to find out a little bit more about yourself or about the book, what's the best way to do that?
I am at Nicole Rufuku, NicoleRufuku on Twitter. And you can email me, NicoleRufuku@gmail, to get more information about the book, and I can add you to the list to get pre-orders.
Excellent. And we'll post that in our show notes as well. Nicole, as always, I love talking to you. Keep us in mind as you produce new things and as new things happen in your life. Keep us abreast of all that kind of stuff. Thanks again for being on Inside Outside Innovation, and look forward to talking to you again.
My pleasure. Thanks, Brian.
That's it for another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. If you want to learn more about our team, our content, our services, check out insideoutside.io or follow us on Twitter at the IO Podcast or at Ardinger. Until next time, go out and innovate.